Hi, everybody. Welcome to Broker Daily. I'm coming to you live from our Brown Harris Stevens office here in Lincoln Center. And today we're going to dive right in again with Ira Gold, our expert real estate attorney. And in the series, we dive deep with my team of experts to find out what it really takes behind the scenes to get a typical New York City real estate transaction done. So click subscribe, reach out to me directly. Ira's information will be at the bottom of the screen and at the end of it as well. So, Ira, how are you today? Great to see you.
Very good, Ed. Glad to be with you again.
Definitely, Ira. Thank you so much. So let's jump right in. Today, we're going to talk about the difference between, in a contract of sale, a financing contingency and a funding contingency. So when buyers come to me and they place offers, or I try to explain this to sellers, it depends on the market. So why would someone remove a financing contingency? That's because it's a hot market and they're competing with hot offers. But a funding contingency is entirely different. So Ira, what's the difference between a financing contingency and a funding contingency? Enlighten us.
Okay, and they're really important concepts for a transaction, and it's really important for you or any broker to do their job before it gets to me and negotiate primarily the mortgage contingency. Whether somebody is going to, and this is what a mortgage contingency is, it gives somebody the right to withdraw from a deal and receive their down payment deposit back if they are unable to obtain both a written commitment letter from an institutional lender and an appraisal that meets the underwriter's guidelines, primarily price, but there are some other things that a lender will tick its box. But um, with as you pointed out, and I think it's a good point, in a very hot real estate market, sellers usually are not interested in giving mortgage contingencies. In a weaker market, they're more open to it, but the consequences to a buyer are huge, whether they have that contingency or not.
Right. So when I talk to buyers in a hot market, what I'll do is I'll tell them the difference, and I always tell them to contact their bank to really explain what the risks are and their attorney to explain what the contractual risks are. So let's jump into funding contingency. So what's a funding contingency and how is that different?
So a funding contingency is later on in the process. So once a buyer has a mortgage contingency and the mortgage contingency has been satisfied, they've received a written commitment letter and with the conditions, which presumably as to themselves, they'll be able to satisfy, and they've received an appraisal that meets the purchase price. So that's no longer a play. But between that time and the time you get to to the closing table, which could be a fair amount of time, if something occurs that causes the bank to say, well, we know we said we were going to lend you the money, but guess what? We're not. Either because there's a global crisis problem, for example, going back to 2008 when we had the financial crisis, banks just stopped lending and they started pulling out of deals. Or the bank has completed its underwriting process and it sees that the co-op itself is not really up to snuff. Something happened. A big lawsuit hit. A big repair is now necessary. Something has changed. Under those circumstances, if a buyer has a funding contingency, again, they should be able to get their contract deposit back. If they do not have that funding contingency, in many circumstances, they would lose their deposit.
Right. Yep. So it's so great that you're able to explain that to buyers, and then I know what it is, so I can explain that to my sellers. So now we know what a financing contingency is. We know what it means to go in without a financing contingency, and another extra layer, I guess, which would be umbrella insurance is a funding contingency in a building. So Ira, anything else to add on that?
No, I mean, the only thing I would add is, once somebody is working with me and we're involved in that process, these contingencies can have a number of subtleties that need to be addressed in order to keep the buyer protected. So it's very important that the attorney sets out what a buyer has to do to keep these contingencies alive so that if the worst should happen, they're protected. That would be all I would add.
Right. So there are dates in the contract that I get. What happens if somebody misses a date in the contract? What if there's, the bank doesn't perform or they can't get their
Right.
loan and there's a date in the contract? What happens
Well,
then?
that's
Can
a
the
good
seller
question.
cancel the contract? Can they
Well,
just cancel?
the most common issue or date would be in every contract for a co-op here in Manhattan, in New York City in general. If a buyer has a mortgage contingency, it will be negotiated how long they have in order to get that commitment letter and that appraisal. It's usually 30 to 45 days. Again, depending on the market that we're in. If we get to the end of that 30 or 45-day period and a buyer does not have both the commitment letter and the appraisal, then if I'm representing the purchaser, I need to be in touch with the seller's attorney, usually at least a week before the end of that period, to say, hey, look, we're close, but we don't have it. Either give us an extension or get ready to give us our money back. So you do need to pay attention to the various deadlines. I always set those deadlines out, whether they have to do with mortgage contingency, board packages. There's any number of dates in a contract, as you just mentioned, that are relevant. And it's important for the buyer and the seller to understand where they are in that process, what they need to do in order to protect themselves.
Right, right. So financing contingency, removing a contingency, of funding contingencies, these things can all help a buyer get into a property in a hot market if the broker knows how to position it, put it on the deal summary, check with their bank, check with their attorney, make sure that before they go into it and sign on the line that is dotted, we're going to help them get that done. Ira, thank you so much for that. It's a seems like an easy concept, but it's really not once you get into the nitty gritty. And that's why I like to dive deep with you, my expert, to find out what it really takes behind the scenes to get these deals done. So subscribe to my channel, Broker Daily. Reach out to Ira Gold. You can reach out to me or Ira directly. Ira, thanks again for your wisdom and your expertise. And I'll see you
Thank you,
next time.
Ed.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep.